Hi everyone. Hello, I can see lots of you writing in the chat box. So if you can hear me, if you can just let me know, that'd be excellent. Perfect. So lots and lots of people from different countries. So we've got Peru, Ukraine, Portugal, Spain. Perfect. Glad everyone can hear me okay. Where else have we got? Indonesia, Mexico, Brazil, Lithuania. So many different time zones. So it's 3 o'clock in the UK here. So I'm based in Cambridge in the UK. So Slovakia, Iran, Argentina, United States. Perfect. From all over. 10 a.m. in Peru, Poland. Hi everyone, and hi to everyone who's watching on Facebook Live as well. So welcome to today's webinar on using the ESAP framework with Gold Experience 2nd edition to help you with quick and easy planning for effective online lessons. So welcome everybody, and thanks so much for coming today. If you still want to keep introducing yourself, just let us know where you're from in the chat box. We've got Uruguay, Poland, Argentina, Warsaw, Turkey, Prague, Egypt. Perfect. Okay, so just a few housekeeping points before we get started. So this webinar is being recorded and you'll be able to find it online within 2 weeks of the event. Within 72 hours of this webinar, you'll receive a certificate of attendance, a link to Pearson's ESAP pack, which includes a cheat sheet and a lesson planner to help you reduce your lesson planning time. You'll also receive a link to this recording and a link to a really useful online guide called How to Teach Online with Gold Experience 2nd edition. So lots of tips, tools, and breakdown of the digital resources and another ESAP lesson that you can use in your virtual classroom. So you'll receive all of this in an email. So do just check your junk or spam box if you haven't received this within 3 days of this webinar. So I'll be asking you guys questions throughout the webinar. So please do feel free to jump in and write in the chat box or write any answers or comments. And if you do have any questions, do try and save them to the end and we'll save a bit of time for that as well. But if I do see any burning questions, I will try and answer those too. So just a little bit about me before we get started. So hi everyone, my name's Billy. As I said previously, I'm based in the UK in Cambridge, and I've been in English language teaching for just over 9 years now. Firstly, as a teacher in different countries around the world. So I taught in China, in Spain, in Italy, and now in the UK. So then I came back and I did my Delta and I taught in a language school in Cambridge. Then I moved on to teacher training and became a freelance materials writer, writing mostly exam course books and digital materials such as apps, for example. And I also have my own teacher training company too. So welcome if you've just joined. As we said, this webinar is recorded and you'll receive an email with your cheat sheet, your planner, and a link to this recording in case you miss anything as well. So let's have a quick look at an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So first, we'll be having a quick look at what the ESAP method actually is. So Magdalena Kania actually gave a detailed introduction into this method last week. But in case you missed it, we'll have a look at the main ideas and just do a quick breakdown of what each stage entails. Then we'll look at ways that you can plan an ESAP lesson using the planner, which you'll be sent after the webinar. Then we'll move on to how we can actually deliver an online ESAP lesson with Gold Experience 2nd edition. So the tools you can use, different methods of feedback, and alternative ways to conduct tasks as well, because we are teaching in a virtual environment as well at the moment, so it can just differ slightly to your real world classroom. And finally, we'll look at the resources available for Gold Experience on the Pearson English portal. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do have any questions, then we will have some time at the end to go through and answer those. Okay, so here is ESAP. So we've got engage in the top left corner, then we've got study, then activate, and then finally practice. So has anyone used this methodology before? If you have, just write yes in the chat box. Let's see if anyone's used it. So Melinda said yes. Renzo, yeah. Okay, quite a lot of people saying no. So hopefully you'll get some good takeaways from this webinar and also from your how-to guide as well. So 2 lessons that you can actually use, so ready-made lessons to reduce your planning time. Perfect. So let's break down what ESAP actually is. So first of all, we've got ENGAGE. So this is the first moment when the students enter the online classroom and are engaged from the very first moment. So this could be asking questions to our students about their day, for example, how they are, how the weather is, what they've been doing, for example. Then comes the warmer activity, sometimes as a lead-in in the book itself, sometimes things that you can sort of add in if you want to supplement, just to sort of introduce the topic and activate that prior knowledge as well. Then we have study, which is the presentation and practice section of the lesson. So new language is introduced here, maybe grammatical structures as well. And then students move on and complete controlled activities. So this stage in an online lesson differs quite a lot from a face-to-face lesson, because the main goal here is to ensure the teacher talking time is kept to a minimum and that we use different ways to present language rather than simply just explaining and our students' cameras are off and we're not really sure if they're engaged and things like that. So with online lessons, it's really important to think of ways to keep the motivation high, and especially through the presentation of language, the practice and the feedback, rather than a heads down approach, which can be quite tricky to do in an online class. Then we've got activate, so the third stage of our ESAP method. So students have the opportunity to practice the language themselves in a freer way. Usually this is oral production. So we can do things like pair and group work, whole class activities or discussions, and generally just different activities to try and get students to use the language and produce it orally as much as possible. And then the final stage, we've got practice. So students can do further activities to challenge them or to reinforce and recycle the language that you've already done in the lesson. So it's really about that autonomous learning. You provide activities for students to do, and then they can do them independently and complete them. So as I said, it could be for an extra support or an extra challenge, or just to reinforce that language as well. Okay, so now we've had a brief look at the ESAP method. Let's think about how we can plan our lessons. So first of all, a quick question for you guys. So do you think that it takes longer for you to plan your online lessons than face-to-face lessons? And if so, how long does it usually take you to plan your online lessons? So I'll give you just a moment to write your answers in the chat box. So Chada said twice as long, double the amount of time, twice longer. Bella said 1 hour. Yeah, about an hour. So most of you are saying that it does take quite a long time, yet because someone mentioned there's more tools to prepare, a lot more digital resources, and they're not all in one place often. Yep, Sergio says quite a bit longer as well. A lot of you are saying half an hour to an hour, so twice as long as it normally would. So yeah, as someone said here, if we use apps and online sheets, it takes a lot longer. Absolutely. I think one of the most important things is just trying to reduce the lesson planning time as much as we can. And hopefully with the lesson planning, the lesson planner and the cheat sheet that we send you after the webinar, hopefully that will help you reduce your lesson planning time. And also you can use this lesson in your classrooms as well. Okay, so the ESAP planner can help you save time in your planning because you can clearly see the steps that you need to take. So we've got your engage, lead-in activities, and then we've got your study, and then your practice, and then your activate. So you can clearly see the aims and the purposes of each stage in each activity. So you can see we've got the content section in the middle here. So this is just a rough lesson plan that I've written for the lesson we'll look at today. So you can write in as little or as much detail as you like. It's totally up to you. I think every teacher's different with how they plan. You can write timings in there if you want to. You can write the discussion questions that you're going to ask, or just the activities that you're going to do. For example, exercise 1, as I've got written there. So then we also have the notes section, which I'd recommend using for two things. So firstly, as a note to help you know where to access those digital tools. So as you can see, for example, on my study stage, I've got a note here on the first activity to go to the Pearson English portal, or PEP, then to resources, and then the grammar presentations, which we'll have a look at a little bit later on. And the second thing I'd use the notes section for is to write how I'm going to get feedback on a particular activity, because this is completely different, as we know, to a real world classroom where we can simply nominate students and they raise their hands, for example. So we have peer feedback, students writing in the chat box, nominating students to unmute themselves, for example, and speak aloud, maybe turning on the camera and doing a thumbs up or thumbs down, or signaling somehow. So I'd probably just make a note of how feedback can be done in each activity in the notes section, so you're not wasting time trying to figure out the best way to do it in the lesson while students' minds are wandering. As I said, every teacher is different and plans differently, but hopefully by using this step-by-step plan, it can help you follow the ESAP methodology and reduce the planning time by breaking it down into clear sections and having a clear purpose for each activity. So one more thing I think which is really useful to mention before we go into our online lesson is that you can access Zoom through the Pearson English portal. So I know a lot of you are teaching on Zoom at the moment, and you can schedule your classes through here as well. So by accessing Zoom through the portal, you've got everything in one place. So you've got your presentation tool, which is your students' book. So you can share your screen and students will have the digital version of the students' book in front of them. And you've also got your digital teacher resources as well. And so with all of that combined, you don't need to worry about technology and flicking from one page to the next because everything's all there for you. So you'll need to log on to your teacher dashboard, and next to your products and classes, you'll see class schedule, as you can see on screen here. And then you'll need to connect your Zoom account and all of your lessons will appear on your dashboard. So it is really, really useful, one, to keep track of what you've got and also what you've got to plan for. And just so, as I said, everything's all in one place. So you don't need to keep flicking back and forwards. Okay, so we're going to look at a lesson from Gold Experience 2nd edition. And we're going to use the ESAP methodology to deliver an online lesson. So as I said, you're absolutely welcome to use this lesson in your own online classroom. It will save a lot of planning time as well. So as we know, our first stage is ENAGAGE. So I should say that this is the B2 level that we're using, and it's Unit 2. And we're going to look at a grammar lesson, which is on page 24, because grammar can be quite tricky to teach online in the online classroom. So a question for you guys. What do you do first when students enter your online lesson? So there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just interesting to see the different ideas and how we interact with our students. So I'll just give you a moment to write your answers in the chat box. Yeah, so we've got small talk, ask about their feelings. Nice. How do you feel? What's the weather like? Greeting. Yeah, check in. Make a friend. Yeah, weather talk. Which lesson they've come from. That's really nice as well if they've had a full day of studying online. Perfect. Watch a 1-minute video. Nice. Then you can generate some discussion. Really great. Perfect. How they are. Excellent. So I think that's exactly what the ENAGAGE stage of the ESAP method's about. So as they enter the online lesson, it's really important that we give them that sort of human interaction. You know, we are a teacher, but, you know, we also care how you are. So how are they? How's their day been? What they've been doing? How's the weather, for example, as lots of you have said in the chat box. Some really, really good engaging questions there. So as I said, it shows that we care, we're engaging our students, and we're also linking the real world to our online classroom as well. So I think most of us would do this in a real life classroom anyway, but it's important just to get students thinking in English and just really getting their minds working. So you could ask your students to write their answers in the chat box, for example, or you could nominate students to unmute themselves and say a couple of sentences about their day, perhaps. If you have shy students, you can get them to turn on the camera and you can ask them a question. Have you studied maths today, for example? Have you learnt any new English words? Thumbs up, thumbs down. If the lesson you're teaching that day links to a previous lesson, you could ask questions about the language or topic from that lesson. Or if you have assigned extra practice activities to the students on their gradebook on the Pearson English portal, you could use the Common Error Report to tell you what to go over or revisit. And we'll look at that in more detail a little bit later on. But the gradebook, as an overview, shows you student scores, it gives automatic grading, and it tells you which activities the class or individual struggled with as well. So if you are unsure on how to use the gradebook, there is a Gold Experience how-to guide being sent to you after this webinar. So be sure to have a good look through that, as the gradebook is a really, really useful tool which really reduces your planning and marking time. As I said, it does give automated feedback on each task in each unit as well. So first of all, in the course book, we've got on the left-hand side here. So with this grammar lesson, because it's part of a whole unit of the topic of travel, there isn't actually a specific lead-in question here. They're presented with an explore grammar box first, and this outlines the main ideas of the grammar of this lesson, which is quite intense. It's past tenses and it's all of them. So hopefully that will be a revision more than a new language point for them. So instead of going straight into our grammar, we'll need to introduce the topic of what we're talking about first with a lead-in activity to engage the students. So as I said, the topic of the unit is travel and the grammar point is past tenses. So a good idea to activate prior knowledge and to engage students could be to display some questions on screen with the grammar already in the sentence for students to discuss. So if you have access to breakout rooms, you could use these, or students could write their answers in the chat box. So I would probably suggest organising the breakout rooms just before your lesson starts. You can assign individual students to each room, as it's always a good idea to pop in and pop out just to monitor as well to make sure students are on task and speaking English. So we've got past tenses and the topic of travel. So what types of lead-in questions do you think we could ask related to travel and the past? So I'll give you a moment to write some of your ideas in the chat box. So some lead-in questions. If we can introduce the grammar in the questions, that'll be even better. So Melinda said, where did you travel last year? Claudia said, first trip ever made. Yeah, so what was the first holiday you ever took? What was the first trip you ever went on? Yep, Sophia, where have you been? Perfect. Harry, what was your favourite ever holiday? Nice. Have you ever questions? Did you travel abroad last year? Exactly. So I think just by including that grammar in the lead-in questions, students are sort of using it without realising, essentially. And also if they have learnt it before and this is more of a revision lesson, at least you'll be aware of that as well. Yeah, so we've got, did you have a good experience last year? What kind of trip did you go on? Where would you like to be right now? That's a really nice question as well. Yeah, so here are some ideas that I came up with, more or less the same as yours. So where did you last travel to? What's the best trip you've been on? When you were younger, did you used to take trips with family, friends or school? And what's the best place you've visited in your country? So lots of good ideas coming in the chat box. So the engage part of the lesson is probably the shortest. So now we are moving on to study. So the engage part is just to sort of activate students' knowledge, engage them in the topic of the lesson. Whereas now we're trying to present and practice the language in a controlled way. So as a teacher, if you come to this lesson, so B2, Unit 2, Grammar, page 24, you might wonder, how on earth am I going to present this grammar? There's so many tenses to go through. We've got past simple, past continuous, past perfect continuous. There's so many different things on this page. So will you just display it for students to look at? Will you have them read the grammar reference at the back of the book first? Will you ask questions to elicit the function, form and use? There's so many different things that you could do, but I think we just need to think of the ways that, one, we can reduce our planning and not overload ourselves with work, as well as engaging the students and providing them something to get involved with as well. So one option might be to provide something visual. So on the Pearson English portal resources for Gold Experience, you have grammar presentations. So you can display your screen and present the grammar this way. So you go to the Pearson English portal, then resources, grammar presentations. These are an absolute lifesaver for me because they provide something really, really visual, and they're really interactive for students, and it saves planning time completely. So as you can see here, we've got the function, the form, and practice activities as well. So you could simply display this on the screen and get students to correct the answers in breakout rooms, or you can simply present it and then click each time there's a new answer come up as well. But they are really interactive. So as you can see in the first slide, we've got past narrative tenses, and we've got a paragraph, and students identify it as well. So it is really engaging for them, and it is something visual for them to look at as well. So another option is maybe to try and elicit the structure from students before presenting anything. So for example, you could display a sample sentence from the Explore Grammar box and put students into breakout rooms to discuss the function, form, and use. And then back in the main lesson, you could have students identify the name of the tense. So in my sentence here, the trip certainly lived up to our expectations. We've got the past simple. So we simply elicit that from students and what they can tell us about the past simple. So in this lesson in particular, because there's multiple tenses being taught or revised, you could switch partners each time for the discussion. So one about past simple, then another pair for past continuous, then another for past perfect. Of course, it depends how long you want this activity to go on for and how best you think it would work with your students and their confidence levels as well. So it's really good to change pairs, one, to get students working with other people and just to see what students already know, they can peer teach, and then also how much practice you'll give them later in the lesson as well. So Nina just asked, will we get a copy of the recording and slides to watch again? So there will be a link to this recording, to this webinar sent to you in an email 72 hours after we finish. So on to the next activity. So now we are on the study stage, as we said. So the first activity, as you can see here with the arrow, it asks students to match the example sentences with the tenses in the Explore Grammar box. So once you've either displayed the grammar presentation or have had students discuss the tenses in breakout rooms, you could do a whole class activity. So you could have a class poll on which sentence matches the tense. So I've used mentimeter.com here, which is completely free to use. You can input each sentence and then have them vote if it's past simple, past continuous, past perfect, and so on. And because it's completely anonymous, students won't feel embarrassed or shy if they don't know the answer. So I've put my example sentence here. Paul was always leaving his shoes in the middle of the floor. So students simply take their phones, they go to menti.com, as you can see on the screen here. They enter the code and they do an anonymous vote for which tense they think this sentence is. And then after a while, the results come up and then you can see, oh, we really, really do need to practice this tense because students weren't aware of what it was, or, oh, they were really, really strong. Maybe we can just quickly revise this as well. So students do just need their phones to vote. So it is quite straightforward, but it's nice because the whole class is involved and students can feel a part of it. And yeah, it just brings a different dynamic to the class apart from the away from the typically heads down approach as well. So I'm not sure if anyone's used this tool before. Perhaps you have, if you'd like to share in the chat box if you've used Mentimeter before. We just got a question saying, how long does this lesson last? It definitely depends if you'd like to do some of the extensions that we mentioned, but I'd say around an hour would be the length of this lesson. Perfect. Yeah, so you can use Mentimeter for lots of different things. Word clouds to get ideas together, for example. You can also use it for polls and rankings. So it is a really, really good tool to have. Okay, so in the next activity, still on the study stage, students listen to an account of an incident in a holiday village. So they're asked to listen for what happened to make people stop and look. So this is a short gist listening task. So you can just play the recording for the whole class to listen to together, then have them write their answers in the chat box. I would do this as sort of a shorter activity because it's sort of the same principle as if you're in the real world lesson, except for the feedback being slightly different. If you are using the presentation tool on the Pearson English portal, the audio is ready to play at the point of use, as you see here. So you don't need to worry about changing screens or wasting time finding it or flicking from one platform to another. So to give students the answer, you can either simply say it or you can press show answer if you're using the presentation tool sharing your screen, which I've circled for you here. The next activity is listening again, but this time in more detail. So you could do the first sentence together as a class if they're of a lower level, just by playing the recording and having students write the missing words in the first sentence, perhaps in the chat box, or you could simply play the recording through for students to make a note of their answers individually. So one way to make this activity more dynamic would be to have peer feedback. So organise students into pairs in breakout rooms to compare their answers. You could then bring them back to the main lesson and have students write any questions they have in the chat box. So this way students are learning from each other, but I think you don't necessarily need to go through every sentence or every answer all the time in feedback. If you trust that your students have the same answer, if you feel that they might be quite confident in this already, peer feedback is a great way to do it. Alternatively, you could nominate students to unmute themselves and read the sentences aloud. This is good because it not only practices pronunciation, but it's sort of a test to check that students are still listening and engaged in the lesson as well. So the next activity we have is sort of a text here, and students have to choose which word is correct to complete the sentence, as you can see from the words in bold here. So it's a text about a customer complaint to a tourist office with our grammar in context, still sticking to the topic of travel. So there are a couple of ways you could do this activity. So firstly, you could simply put students into small groups in breakout rooms to read through and choose the correct answers together. Alternatively, you could do a whole class quiz to get all of the students interacting with each other. So students would still go off into their breakout rooms and choose their answers, but then come back to the main room to hear you read the text aloud, or maybe a nominated student, and then pairs write A or B in the chat box with their chosen answer. So although there's no A or B in the answer options, we can just say A is the first word choice, B is the second one, and we can do it as a quiz. Students then award themselves points, and the winning team is the team with the most correct answers. So really bringing the whole class together in an activity like this. Also on the presentation tool on your portal, you have access to a scoreboard, which you can see here on the screen. So you can keep track of points with this, and you can add or remove as many teams as you need. So when you log on to your presentation tool, you'll see that you have a toolbar on the left-hand side, and you can access the scoreboard. And then with the boxes in the top right-hand corner, you can add or remove teams, and you can also change the team names as well. Now we're moving on to the activate stage of the lesson. So remember, this is where students have freer language production and can personalise what they've just learned in their own contexts. So our activity here, as we can see on screen, is complete these sentences in your own words using a variety of past tenses. Now, this is a writing and speaking focused activity, so you could get students to write their ideas down and then put them into breakout rooms in groups to discuss their ideas and elaborate on them, ask each other questions, and generally have an interaction about them. Or you could simply go straight to breakout rooms, have students produce the language spontaneously, which is always a good option to challenge the students a bit. So of course, this depends on the level of your personal class and how confident you think they'd feel with spontaneous spoken production. But I think if you do have an exam focused class, spontaneous production is the best way to get students to sort of put this language into context as they would in a Cambridge exam or IELTS, for example. And finally, in Activate, we have the Speak Up section. So this is again oral production of the target language. So this activity could be completed similar to the last. So students are in breakout rooms, discuss their ideas in pairs or groups. So do remember to keep popping into those breakout rooms just to ensure students are on task, still speaking English, particularly if you do have a monolingual class. So when students come back to the main lesson, you could nominate them to unmute themselves and share what they've discussed, or you could even set a small sort of homework task moving into the practice stage where students record themselves talking about one of the prompts and then send it to you to be marked. And we'll have a look at a digital tool that you can use for that online as well. So yeah, someone's asked which level is this. So this is Gold Experience and it is B2. So it's Unit 2 we're looking at. So now we're moving on to the practice stage. So what does this stage involve? Does anyone remember from the beginning when we looked at the overview of the methodology? So what happens in the practice stage? If you can write your answers in the chat box, I'll just give you a moment. So we've had the production stage, which was Activate. So students have just been into their breakout rooms. In this activity, they completed the sentences in their own words. And then here they discussed situations that had happened to them. So we're moving on to practice. Okay, so Jeanette said review. Sergio says homework, 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 reinforce. Exactly, Dora, yeah. Homework. Yeah, as someone pointed out here, I think feedback is important throughout each stage of this lesson. Maybe not necessarily engage, but definitely during study, we need a lot of feedback and Activate as well on that freer language production so we can error correct or delay error correction as well. Yeah, so most of you have said what the practice stage is. So it's homework, a revision, reinforcing the language, and also opportunities for self-study, so tasks that students can do with this language outside of the lesson. Okay, so Gold Experience has a wealth of extra practice materials and resources, just so many to reinforce the language from the lessons, to provide support or a challenge for students. So the first place to look is the unit check at the end of each unit, as you can see on screen. So there are always practice revision exercises with language, grammar and exam tasks from each lesson. And you'll also find more activities for grammar in the grammar file at the back of the student's book or on the portal in the teacher's resources. The same goes for writing, speaking and exam practice. So there's a file for each of these at the back of the student's book or on your Pearson English portal. So they can be found on the resources section. So if you haven't logged into your portal, you open the cover of your teacher's book, you'll find your code. You go onto the Pearson English portal, we'll put the link into the chat for you, and then you add your class, your Gold Experience will come up, and then you've got your presentation tool and your resources on there as well. Okay, so as I said, yeah, we've got the unit check and the grammar file for extra practice. And also in the teacher's resources on the portal, you'll find a section called Practice Homework Activities. So here you'll find activities for each unit for students to self-study. So you can see that here there are 4 different activities for the grammar in this unit. So Unit 2, and here's an example of one of them on the right here. So complete the sentences with the past form of these verbs, which is excellent because we've just presented and practiced past tenses in our lesson. So these tasks can be assigned to students and have automatic grading, which is a lifesaver in reducing planning time along with your ESAP planner. So in the students area, they'll be able to see the activities that they need to complete and a personalised gradebook so students can see their own performance. So teachers will be able to access your students' results, your class results, so that you can plan your lessons and focus on or revisit anything that you think your students still need to practice based on these gradebook results. So it really, really does save the teacher a lot of time, as you don't need to mark anything. It's automatic. You can simply open this and say, we really need to practice these past tenses because students didn't do very well, or they did very well on these past tenses. I think we can just revisit this quickly before their exam, for example. And remember, you can also use your ESAP lesson planner with this to further reduce your planning as well. So, of course, we have the workbook where we can give students extra practice. And this is available on the teacher's portal in the presentation tool. So where you access your student's book, you'll see in the top right corner, you can uncheck student's book and check workbook, and all of the activities will come up and the pages for that. So if you are going to teach this lesson, this is the specific page that you can use to reinforce and practice for homework. So we've got page 16 of the workbook with sentence completion activities and a matching task as well. And students also have access to the app, which is available both on iOS and Android. So the app does give students additional grammar, vocabulary, listening, and use of English exercises to help them consolidate the language and grammar points covered in the student's book and individual lessons. So as you can see, there are plenty of different ways we can encourage students to study and review independently outside of the classroom, and lots of resources to help you as a teacher reduce your planning and marking time, which is the goal that we all want to achieve when we're teaching online. So all of this information about the app, about the gradebook, how to access your portal, will all be in your how-to guides that you'll receive a link to in the follow-up email within 72 hours. So do have a look through that how-to guide because it's very, very useful. So there are also some really useful and free online tools that you can use in your digital classroom to make it more dynamic and engaging. So we have Actively Learn here. So you can add questions or notes and post an article. It's like a discussion board for you and the class, but it's private for you guys. These all are free. I think there are also paid versions of it as well, but you can access them for free and use them in your class. We've also got Wordwall, where you can create custom activities similar to Quizlet or Padlet if you've used that before. And Storybird, which is very good for teens or maybe even young learners, is where students practice their creative writing skills by creating online books. And they can do this anonymously as well. So it is really good for writing practice or less confident students. So do feel free to say if you've used any of these in the chat box. We've also got 3 more good resources here. So we've got Padlet, which I'm sure most of you have used. So it's an interactive note board. So you can add photos, text, articles, documents, links, audio recordings, and it's sort of like an online area just for you and your class. And then we've got Quizlet, where you can create flashcards, or students can create self-study flashcards, or different activities such as matching. I think there's also polls on there as well. And finally, Flipgrid, which is a really good one. It's sort of a video community. This is really good for an essay question, for example. The teacher records a video of themselves saying the question, and then students can sort of write their answers, or they could even give you the answer orally as well. And then you can watch each other's videos and respond. So I can see a lot of you in the chat box are saying Padlet, Quizlet. I think they're really, really useful and probably the most popular ones. But yeah, I think the most important thing is just being planned and prepared and knowing exactly where you're going to find that technology so that we don't lose students' engagement when we're trying to sort of find what we're going to use. So we've looked at the ESAP methodology for teaching online, had a look at a lesson from Gold Experience 2nd edition, and also different ways of engaging students, making the activities varied as well. And we've also had a look at some resources here online and also resources available on the Pearson English portal. So now I think we have some time for questions. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box and I'll do my best to answer them. So I'll just give you a moment. I'll also have a look up, see if anybody's written anything that I've missed. So someone's asked, do you plan to have this Pearson portal for MacBooks? So I actually use a MacBook and the Pearson English portal is online. So yeah, as you can see the link, so pearsonenglish.com/portal, it's simply online, so you can use it with a Microsoft or with a MacBook, should be fine. So Margarita asks, are the portal resources free? So if you do have Gold Experience or another Pearson book, for example, you do have digital resources with it. Differs depending on which book you use. So do just check the inside cover to see if you do have the digital components included, as some of them don't. Yeah, perfect. Any other questions? Do you have any sites for us to play with students? So I think these ones are very good that I've mentioned: Padlet, Quizlet, Actively Learn. Also, if you do a quiz, you can use the tools that I showed you earlier on. So for example, here with the teams and the scoreboard as well. Alondra said the code is in the student's book. Yep, so on the inside cover of the student's book and the teacher's book for your teacher's resources. Yep. So Laura said, where in the portal is the gradebook available? So the gradebook is available for the students, so they'll be able to see the activities that you've assigned to them. And then the online practice activities is where you assign to the students on your resources. Okay, what else have we got? Yeah, so Anna said on the portal, Zoom is available. Yeah, so you've got you can schedule your classes on there, simply log into your Zoom account and all of your classes will come up and then it's all in one place. So Yoshiko said, in peer feedback, if a student says that his partner doesn't know the answers and asks, what is the point? What can I do? I think you can get around that by changing the pairs of students that they're working with. If you know someone's got a particularly high level and someone maybe has a lower level, not very low, but a lower level, pair them together, see if they can learn from each other as well. And just make sure you're changing those pairs too. Okay, and I think that is about it for questions. Dominica said, what about Teams? At the moment, it's just Zoom available on the portal, but I believe on Teams, you can also share your screen. So you can still log onto the presentation tool on the Pearson English portal and share your screen as you would do exactly the same through Zoom as well. And I believe Google Meets might be the same too. Okay, so I can't see any other questions coming through. So if you do use the ESAP methodology, if you do use the planner, if you use any of the resources that we talked about today, do feel free to share it with the hashtags on screen so we can keep the conversation going about the ESAP method. And just a reminder that there are plenty of other ESAP webinars happening this week with myself, Michael and Magdalena. So do register for those, as they'll be really helpful for your online lessons if you use other course books as well. So just a quick reminder that the webinar was recorded and you'll receive a certificate of attendance, a link to your ESAP pack with a cheat sheet and the planner that we looked at, a link to this recording if you missed anything, and also a link to the online guide, How to Teach with Gold Experience. And then that will explain everything from the guide, the gradebook, to the Pearson English portal, and some extra resources in there for you as well. So thank you so much for coming, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed it. Do let us know if you use the lesson in your own online class or any of the resources. Thanks so much for coming, and have a good rest of your day wherever you are, or good evening. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.